In this episode of my Godot Engine Water Shader mini tutorial series, we're adding depth transparency and color to our water shader. To do this, we'll make use of the depth and screen textures, and as always, you can grab the source files for this and all my Godot tutorials on my Patreon. To create the effect of light scattering as the water gets deeper, while making more shallow water more transparent, we need to use the depth and screen textures. Will provide us with a float value detailing the depth of our water. Our transparency will come from sampling the screen texture, giving us the pixel information behind our water plane. We'll then use that to mix between the screen texture and our watercolor to create a transparent effect. In our water shader code from the first episode, we first make these adjustments to our uniforms. We add a new secondary color that we'll use to add a depth color gradient, as well as some value adjustments to our existing uniforms. Also note the addition of hint ranges, where we can set a min, max, and step size to make adjusting our uniform values more convenient, as well as keeping values in a reasonable range. We then add a new set of uniforms to get our depth texture, screen texture, and some new depth float values. Depth distance will allow us to set how far our depth gradient will go. Beer's law will be a formula value that will allow us to change how clear or dirty the water is, basically how much it absorbs and scatters light, and water transparency will allow us to change the overall transparency look of the water. In our fragment function, before our albedo code, we get a sample value per pixel of our depth texture and our screen texture. We then need to adjust our depth texture to a more usable form. We achieve that with the following code. And I know this is part of the reason why tutorials can suck, but I'm not going to go over the projection views and matrices in this tutorial because, frankly, it would just be too much information. But basically, we're projecting our depth texture across the screen and adjusting it so that it shows the distance of our plane pixel compared to the geometry behind it in world space. We then use that information in our depth distance setting to get a float value between 0 and 1, giving us this texture. Finally, the Beer's law formula allows us to customize that curve of that interpolation to make the water more or less transparent. We then take our new depth blend texture and use it to lerp between our primary and secondary watercolors to get our depth color. We also lerp between our new depth color and the screen texture using our overall water transparency. Then finally get our final albedo value by lerping between that final color value and our screen texture again using our depth blend value. I've also multiplied it by our Fresnel to lessen the depth effect as we look more parallel to our water. You should now have a customizable depth effect for your water shader where you can adjust the color, make it more cloudy, or completely transparent. As always, you can grab the source files for this project and a bunch of my other Godot tutorials on my Patreon. And until next time, keep creating.